Welcome to the MacBook versus Linux desktop presentation. Today we are comparing two very different computers that cost the same amount, $600. On one side we have the Apple's brand new MacBook Neo with an 18 Pro chip. On the other side, a custom-built Linux desktop with MX Linux. We will explore the specifications, performance, use cases, and value so we can help you decide which machine fits your life. Let's dive into the performance showdown. The MacBook Neo is the Apple's newest entry-level laptop at just $600. It features the A18 Pro chip, which is iPhone silicon adapted for a laptop. You get a beautiful 13-inch display with 500 nits of brightness. That means you can see it in the daylight. Battery life is incredible, up to 16 hours of video playback. It weighs only 2.7 pounds, and this makes it ultra portable. However, it runs Mac OS only and locks you into the Apple ecosystem. Let's look at the core hardware. The 18 Pro has a 6-core CPU with 2 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. Graphics are handled by a 5-core integrated GPU. You get 8 GB of unified memory with 60 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. Storage is a 256 GB SSD, and even that is soldered to the board. So is the 8 GB of memory. Ports are limited to 2 USB-C connections and a headphone jack. There are critical constraints to consider. The RAM is soldered, so you cannot upgrade it ever. Storage is also fixed internally. There is no native Linux support currently for this chip. The fanless design means it will throttle performance under heavy sustained loads to manage the heat that is generated. It is also limited to a single external monitor, which constrains productivity workflows significantly. The alternative is a custom Linux desktop built for quality. The alternative is a custom Linux desktop built from quality used parts for around $600. It features an AMD Ryzen 5 5600 processor with 6 cores and 12 threads. Graphics are handled by a dedicated Radeon RX 6600 with 8 GB of RAM just for the video memory. You get 32 GB of DDR4 RAM and 1 TB NVMe SSD. It runs Linux optimized for performance on this hardware. The Linux desktop offers massive advantages in upgradability. You can upgrade the RAM all the way up to 128 GB, and if you change the motherboard, you can go up to 256 GB or 512 GB, or even a terabyte. You can add storage drives anytime you need space. The GPU is replaceable if you want better graphics or performance later. The CPU can be upgraded on the same socket, and even the motherboards can be upgraded. Most importantly, you have full root access and complete control over your operating system and your data. In CPU benchmarks, the MacBook does pretty good. It scores 3,461 in single core, beating the Linux desktop's 2,000 points. This makes the Mac snappier for light tasks. Multi-core scores are close, 8,546 for the Mac versus 7,300 for Linux. However, the Linux score is sustained indefinitely while the Mac throttles. It's going to do that in like 10 to 15 minutes estimated. For single core tasks, the Mac wins. For sustained multi-core work, it's effectively a tie. Graphics performance is a massive gap. There's a massive gap in it. MacBook's integrated GPU scores around 3,000 points in the benchmarks, and the Linux dedicated 6,600 scores around 8,500 points. That means the Linux desktop is around 3 times faster for graphics, and it also has 8 GB of dedicated video RAM versus the shared memory of the Mac. For any graphics work, the Linux desktop dominates completely. Memory is the biggest real-world difference. The MacBook has 8 GB total, but the Mac OS itself uses 2.5 GB. This leaves only 5.5 GB for your apps. In the Linux desktop, There is 32 GB total, with MX Linux using only half a GB, which leaves 31.5 GB for apps. That's way more than 4 times more available RAM. For multitasking, virtual machines, Docker containers, heavy browsing, and Linux, the Linux desktop wins for productivity and hands down in many ways. Storage capacity also favors the desktop heavily. The MacBook comes with a 256 GB SSD that is also soldered permanently. After the system files, you have around 230 GB of usable space. The Linux desktop has a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD, and after the system files, you have around 990 GB of usable space. That is again more than 4 times more space. Plus, you can easily add more drives into the Linux desktop. The MacBook's strengths. Battery and portability. You get 11 to 16 hours of real battery life depending on the usage, and it weighs only 2.7 pounds. This is ultra light for carrying. The fanless design ensures it's always silent, so you can use it anywhere, like in coffee shops, classes, airplanes, easily without having to worry about any kind of noise. For travel and mobility, the MacBook is the undisputed winner over the desktop. Thermal management reveals a key trade-off. The MacBook is fanless, so it is silent, but throttles performance after about 10 to 15 minutes of heavy load to avoid overheating. The Linux desktop uses active fan cooling. There is a slight noise under load, but there is no thermal throttling ever. It maintains peak performance indefinitely. So for sustained work, Linux wins. Operating system freedom differs dramatically. The MacBook runs macOS, a closed ecosystem with no native Linux support currently. You are limited to Apple-approved software also. The Linux desktop runs MX Linux, which is open source. You have full root access, complete control. You can install any software, modify anything, enjoy privacy without telemetry. For freedom, Linux wins. And you can also install any type of operating system through virtual machines and run them simultaneously. In web browsing, light use with 10 tabs is smooth for the Macintosh. However, heavy browsing with 50 or more tabs tells a different story. The MacBook starts slowing down as it runs out of RAM and swaps to disk. The Linux desktop handles 50 plus tabs with no issue due to the massive RAM headroom. For researchers or heavy browsers, Linux wins. For software development, the MacBook is good for light coding and scripting. However, the 8 GB RAM is severely limiting running Docker containers or virtual machines. Not very easy to do that in that amount of RAM. The Linux desktop with the 32 GB of RAM handles Docker and VMs easily. It also provides native Linux development tools without compatibility layers. For serious development, DevOps, or data science, the Linux desktop is the clear winner. For gaming and media, the gap is huge. The MacBook has a limited game library and integrated GPU, and the integrated GPU struggles with modern titles. The Linux desktop supports the large Steam library with Proton compatibility. The RX 6600 GPU handles 1080p gaming at high or ultra settings easily. For entertainment and gaming, the Linux desktop is the superior choice. Privacy and control differ significantly. The MacBook has telemetry enabled by default, and Apple controls the software ecosystem. Your data often syncs to the iCloud. The Linux desktop has no telemetry in MX Linux. You own your data completely. There are no forced updates or tracking. For privacy advocates, journalists, or security conscious users, the Linux desktop is the winner. Both systems cost around $600 initially. The MacBook is $600 all in one, including screen and battery. The Linux build splits the cost. CPU $120, GPU $140, RAM $70, SSD $60, motherboard is like $90, power supply $50. The result is a similar price point, but the specifications you get are vastly different for that amount of money. Long-term value favors the desktop. When calculating cost per GB of RAM, the MacBook is $75 per GB. The Linux is only $18. For graphics performance, the Mac is like $0.2 per benchmark point, while the Linux is 7 cents per benchmark points. The Linux desktop offers approximately 4 times better value per dollar spent on raw specifications and capability of the system. To conclude, the MacBook offers portability and polish with premium build quality. The Linux desktop offers power and flexibility with upgradability. The fundamental trade-off is mobility versus capability. There is no perfect choice, only the right choice for your specific life and workflow. Ask yourself what fits your daily needs best. Thank you for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions or comments, they are most welcome.